Welcome to Class 6, Part 2, Operations of the Warren County Community College Drone Program, Part 107, PREP, which is part of our UAS 105 course on remote piloting. In this lesson, what we're going to do is go through a couple more things on drone operations. We're going to go through emergency procedures, aeronautical decision-making, and crew resource management. Please understand that these are broad overviews in helping you prepare for your Part 107 test. So this is not an in-depth look at emergency procedures. It is not an in-depth look at aeronautical decision-making, which is also known as ADM, and it's not an in-depth look at crew resource management, otherwise known as CRM. But it will give you a basic understanding of these concepts. Here's a question you might expect in regard to operations on the test. When should you conduct a pre-flight inspection? And the answer is pre-flight inspections are required before each flight. Now, understand that this is required, which means if something were to go wrong on your flight and the FAA was to come out and look at it, they would want to see evidence that you do pre-flight inspections. In our previous video, I went through a checklist, which is what I recommend. Also remember, each flight is not defined as each mission. It's defined as each time the drone touches down on the ground and takes off again. Each one is an independent flight. So if you have to change a battery or you have to move the drone to a different takeoff location for your mission, you're in essence engaging in a new flight, and you should go through your pre-flight checklist. You may have a modified version of that, which goes a little bit quicker. And it isn't as in-depth as your first flight of the day, but you should have an understood process and procedure for this that you could easily explain if something were to go wrong. And there is no scenario that precludes such an inspection. So in other words, if you're on the ground, there's no emergency to take off again. So there's no reason why you would have ever that you wouldn't do another pre-flight inspection. Let's talk a little bit about crews and crew resource management. As we've kind of gone over in previous videos, the concept of the crew in remote piloting has grown. So a crew could be just the remote piloting command. That's the only person, say, certified Part 107, pass test individual acting as the remote piloting command could be the entire crew. You may also have a person manipulating the controls. So you may be in charge of the mission. You may have the license, but in essence, you may have someone else using the controls. Another or multiple people could be visual observers. We often talk about that as a visual observer, but it could be multiple people acting in that role. And we're seeing new kinds of ideas for crew members come into existence in remote piloting, depending on the sophistication of the drone and or the mission, which may include things like air bosses, security personnel, PR individuals, etc. But regardless of what it is, every crew member should be briefed before the mission. So FAA is going to talk a lot about this in terms of communication procedures. So the FAA requires the remote piloting command and other crew members to coordinate to scan the airspace in the operational area for potential collision hazards. So as we see in our kind of image here, he doesn't have his eyes on the drone. He's looking at the first-person view in his controller, which is totally acceptable. But someone needs to keep their eyes on the drone. So we would assume there's a visual observer also watching the drone in the air at the same time. You need to also maintain awareness of the position through direct visual observation, which we just kind of spoke about. So he's kind of violating the rules here if he's the lone remote pilot in command. He should be looking back and forth between the first-person view and looking directly at the drone and simultaneously scanning the airspace. So you start to get the sense of how difficult this could be under certain circumstances, like an active construction site, for a single pilot in command. So in order to achieve the two goals above, the remote pilot should, one, foster an environment of open communication, and this is really important in the test taking. You're in command, but it's not a directive kind of command. You want an open communication environment where crew members can shout out things to you if there's something going to go wrong, because your goal here is to avoid an accident or to avoid anything that would be detrimental to both your operation, your mission, but also the drone industry or any innocent people on the ground or any innocent people in the sky. So you need to have that open communication. Almost if you think back to certain management techniques in the past, the now defunct company Saturn comes to mind, where anybody was empowered on the line to pull the chain and stop the operations. Similarly, here's what you want. You need to establish these communication procedures before the flight. Are you going to use walkie-talkies? Are you going to use megaphones? Are you going to just shout back and forth? Will you be standing next to each other so you're directing? Will there be code words like, I don't know, red, 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 red means danger? Airplane, you need to develop some kind of procedures for communicating back and forth so people understand what's going on. And so you should do that. You should brief the crew as well. Select an appropriate method of communication we just talked about, and inform the crew members as conditions change. So again, this idea of speaking back and forth is vital. So basic communication procedures might include, and especially if you're using walkie-talkies or some other kind of electronic equipment, listen before you transmit. We all know that person. They hold down the button the entire time when they have the walkie-talkie. So a little bit of a briefing, a little bit of practice before you put the drone in the air, if you're going to use such equipment, probably not a bad idea. You want everyone on the crew to think before they key the transmission, because the last thing you want is someone doing what I just did a second ago, which is kind of stuttering through, forgetting what you were going to say. It takes up valuable time, especially in an urgent situation. Place the microphone close to your lips and speak in a conversational tone. So you don't want to, we all have this tendency to kind of yell as if it's going to help the digital equipment. You see people doing this on their cell phone, for some reason, always on an airplane or within an airplane. Be alert to sounds and lack of sounds. Be aware of broken communications. If all of a sudden it's silence, that may give you a sense that you have an issue with your communication equipment. You should also be aware that the phonetic alphabet is what pilots use. As a child, you learned your ABCs. If you want to be a pilot, you have to learn another alphabet, and this is the aviation alphabet or the phonetic alphabet. This is the alphabet used by pilots, air traffic control, the military, often law enforcement, among others, to correctly issue instructions. So when you're doing this, it's Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo, Foxtrot, Golf, Hotel, India, Juliet, Kilo, Lima, Mike, November, Oscar, Papa, Quebec, Romeo, Sierra, Tango, Uniform, Victor, Whiskey, X-Ray, Yankee, Zulu. And those are your phonetic alphabets. And this takes some time to kind of get a sense of this. And again, we have it here as well. You probably are familiar with the concept of Whiskey, Tango, Foxtrot, often in texting known as WTF, and you know what that stands for. This alphabet is used to avoid mistakes caused by letters and numbers that sound similar. Some letters M, N, B, D are easily mistaken for one another. That can be exacerbated if there's static interference. If it's short, in other words, it's like an urgent situation when communicating between the cockpit, the tower, or between you and your crew on the ground. So this might be I remember this one from my own Part 107 test. N169US would be spoken as November 169 or Uniform Sierra. So this was a question on my test, and I remember it. This was my favorite question on the test. I did not see this on any of my recurrent tests, but for example, when flying Hawk N666CB, the proper phraseology for Whitted Air Traffic Control Tower would be spoken as, and this was a question. It was easy to remember because it was obviously the longest answer, I think, on the entire test, but it would be Whitted Tower, Hawk 666, Charlie Bravo 5, nautical miles west of the airport, request permission to enter Class D airspace for unmanned aircraft operations below 400 above ground level, 3 nautical miles west of the airport. So you would speak that entire thing out, even though there's a couple times when there's letters. Another example would be the correct method for stating 4,500 is not 4,500 MSL. It would be 4,500 mean sea level to air traffic control. So 4,500, and you'll want to remember that. In addition, there are some standard aviation phraseologies that you need to be aware of. So a non-standard would be say what. That's not a way an aviator would speak. It would be more along the line of confirm, correction, come back, acknowledge, advise intentions. You see them on the right-hand side, and there's a whole bunch of them if you bought in the ASA test prep that we recommend. The phonetic alphabet or spelling alphabet replaces letters and numbers with code words. The alphabet is used by pilots and air traffic control when they're talking over radios to ensure that voice communications are easily understood. Certain combinations of letters and numbers can be hard to understand over the radio, particularly when spoken by non-native speakers or people with unfamiliar accents. Remember, this is a language that would be used globally. Planes fly all over the world. So pilots will come in and out of the U.S. airspace with all kinds of first languages. So this helps, again, to make sure everybody's on the same page and they're easily understood between one another. So this is an international system that is essential. You can't have people coming in and out of each other's airspace not knowing what they're saying because they're using their vernacular or native tongue. This phraseology reduces the risk that a message could be misunderstood. It aids the read-back, hear-back process so that an error is more quickly detected. Ambiguous or non-standard phraseology is a frequent cause or contributory factor in aircraft accidents and incidents. So people trying to explain themselves in their vernacular causes issues. International standards are laid down in those volumes of the ICAO, and you could look those up if you're really interested in this. That will not be in that level on the test. You should also be familiar with ATIS. The Automatic Terminal Information Service is an automatic provision of current routine information arriving and departing aircraft throughout the 24 hours or specified time portion. The Data Link Automatic Terminal Information Service, or DATIS, the provision of ATIS via Data Link Voice Automatic Terminal Information Service, or the Voice ATIS, is a provision of ATIS by means of continued and repetitive voice broadcasts. So you may get information coming out to the digital receiver in your airplane. Not many drones have this at this point, or it could be voice, and you may be able to listen on that. So if you're inbound to an airport with no tower, no flight service station, or a Unicom, then you announce your intentions on multicom, and the most common number is 122.9. Okay, so they're going to have you look a couple of these up. Remember, you're going to look for that CTAF, that kind of on your sectional chart, the number or the frequency right next to the C that's colored in. It's usually almost always going to be 122.9. And of course, the FAA, when they test you, will give you the 3 or 4 examples in the book that aren't 122.9. Usually the Coeur d'Alene area in your sectional chart. There's both a page from the sectional chart and a page from the U.S. supplement in your supplement that they give you at the test. So be aware, when you get to the Coeur d'Alene, you'll notice Lake Coeur d'Alene, a lot of seaplanes, little airports. The big airliners fly into Spokane. So there's a lot of interference there in terms of radio frequencies. So you'll kind of see that on the test, but be aware of that. In addition to radio frequencies, there are frequencies on which small unmanned aircraft fly. Right now, most, if not all, commercial small unmanned aircraft are going to either fly on the 2.4 gigahertz or the 5.8 gigahertz frequency. This is a number you may not be familiar with. Understand that this can lead to a lot of frequency interference because both of these frequencies are basically open frequencies commonly used by Wi-Fi. So you get a lot of frequency interference, which is what the FAA is going to say causes lost links and flyaways. There's some debate over that. I sometimes think that people just forget to charge the remote control as much as anything, but you can get this frequency interference. Also know that these frequencies are propagated through the air, but they do not go through things like a building. They may go through trees, but dense foliage may cause a problem. So there are obstructions, which is why visual line of sight is so vitally important right now for drone operations, because really what you're doing with visual line of sight is ensuring you're keeping what's known as frequency line of sight, or just line of sight, with your drone at all times in your remote control. So understand, when your remote control cannot get these 2.4 or 5.8 gigahertz frequencies to the drone, issues emerge. You should also know that some of the more modern drones, maybe not some of the older versions, the DJI Phantom is sitting there. So some of the older ones ran off 2.4. Now, like a Phantom 4 has both, and it also will automatically switch back and forth to the area where there's less frequency. You can control that switching back and forth if you like, but you can look at that in your DJI Go 4 app and see what frequencies you're running on. It may be some larger decimal places out, but it's going to be in that 2.4 or 5.8 range. If you really want to get into this stuff, you can get yourself a spectral analyzer or spectrum analyzer, and the RF Explorer is a really nice, inexpensive one that works really well. We use it here at the college. And the spectrum analyzer measures the magnitude of an input signal versus frequency within the full frequency range of the instrument. The primary use is to measure the power of the spectrum of the known and unknown signals. The input signal that a spectrum analyzer measures is electrical. However, spectral compositions of other signals, such as acoustic pressure waves and optical light waves, can be considered through the use of an appropriate transducer, transponder. So here's basically what you have at this point. You're trying to figure out how much frequency interference you might experience. Now, if you're out in a big rural area, you probably don't need to do this frequently. If I was flying over people, I would definitely do this, because again, you want to protect the airspace and you want to protect people on the ground. If I'm in a large urban environment where I know there's a lot of Wi-Fi, I'm going to probably measure this and take a look and get a sense of the level of additional interference I might expect there, so that I can be extra cautious. And that's really what you're trying to do. You should also know that there is something called a flight service station. We haven't talked about it. I've mentioned it, but we haven't talked about it. So let me give you a sense of what it is. A flight service station, or an FSS, is an air traffic facility that provides information and services to aircraft pilots before, during, and after flights. But it is not air traffic control. They do not give instructions or clearances or provide separations in the air. What they do is they may relay the clearances from ATC for departure or approach. They're at an airport. People who communicate with pilots from an FSS are referred to as flight service specialists. As it says, the services are going to vary by location, even by country. But here's what you might expect to find at a flight service station. Pre-flight briefings, including weather and NOTAMs, filing, opening, and closing of their flight plans. You don't have to do that necessarily as a drone pilot. You should have a plan, but you don't have to file them. Monitoring navigational aids, known as nav aids, collecting and disseminating pilot reports, known as PREPs, and airport surface weather observations, offering traffic advisories to aircraft on the ground or in flight, relaying instructions or clearances from air traffic control, and relaying information about airborne aircraft to their home bases, military bases, homeland security, providing weather advisories to aircraft in flight. You probably have had that on the plane when he tells you it's about to get turbulent. That's how they know. They're getting information from an airport on the ground, locally, a flight service station. Initiating search and rescue on missing visual flight rule aircraft, and providing assistance in an emergency. Any of these things might matter. You probably won't see these on your drone test, but I wanted you to be aware of what they did, because you might see the term flight service station. So at least now you know what it is. Let's talk about emergency procedures. All right, so here's your kind of catchphrase for taking your test. When in doubt, remember, we've kind of talked about this before, there are no air certifications currently for drones. They're too inexpensive to go through that process. So you're the responsible as the remote pilot in command, and then you're also responsible for always checking manufacturer guidance. That's the catch-all phrase. You may find out that your manufacturer hasn't provided much guidance. You may have built your own drone, in which case you have to come up with your own guidance. In the case of an in-flight emergency, remote PICs can deviate from any rule of Part 107 to address an emergency. So remember that in an emergency, you may deviate from any of the rules that we've gone over so far to address the emergency. You can't deviate for the rest of your life, just till that emergency is ended. FAA may request a written report of the deviation. So if you do deviate, you don't automatically go to like the drone zone or write the FAA a letter. You wait for them to ask you as the remote pilot in command to explain what you were doing. This does happen. There are a number of videos out there where you can see people, the letters they've gotten from the FAA. They like to post those. I can't show you one because I've never gotten one. That's me knocking on wood. Let's talk a little bit about emergency procedures. You have two different things. You have an abnormal situation versus an emergency situation. So an abnormal situation. In anything abnormal, catch all, answer, refer to the manufacturer guidance. A lost link is an abnormal situation. It is not an emergency. You should have pre-programmed your drone, read your manufacturer's guidance, and come up with lost link procedures. If you're not familiar with these, you can go on the internet. A number of people will explain them to you. A number of people will go through like a DJI or unique lost link procedures or other commercial off-the-shelf drones like Parrot. And you want to make sure you pre-program them. So if you lose the link, usually the drone will climb to an altitude you have preset, which is above any obstruction, and then fly back to the home point or the place where it took off, or to the remote control that the pilot may be holding, a number of different things. So that's what should happen. That way you prevent a flyaway. That's why it's not an emergency, because it's still acting in a predetermined manner because you've lost the link between the remote control and the drone. You can also look for alternate landing sites. You don't always have to land where you took off. You can also do a hand landing. A loss of GPS will happen frequently. That's why at Warren, when we do live flight training, the first thing we do is you fly drones without the GPS. So that way, when this happens, and it happens to everyone, you'll be prepared. You may lose the video, the first person view on the monitor. That can happen. But again, because you're keeping the drone in line of sight, that shouldn't be an emergency. It should just be an abnormal situation. You can land and restart everything, and hopefully it comes back in. Avoiding manned aircraft. Again, it's not an emergency when you're avoiding manned aircraft. At a distance, it's only an emergency if you're in imminent chance of an impact or crash. And unexpected flight termination. Drone falls out of the sky because the propeller popped off. Not an emergency, not much you can do there. You just go pick up the pieces. Emergencies are flyaway. A flyaway is an emergency. In other words, the lost link procedures did not occur as previously planned, and the drone just flew away. Loss of control link. Here is where the lost link procedures again don't happen. Nothing you do with the remote control is being received by the drone, and it is not behaving appropriately. Avoidance of a crash. So in other words, if an imminent crash is coming, you have to climb to 16,000 feet. You'd never had to go that high. That would be, that would be allowable. You would fly above the 400 feet to avoid the manned air. A battery fire is an emergency in the drone. Okay, don't forget, when the drone hits the ground, depending on where you're flying, foliage, whatever, that battery is going to burn hot. It can be very dangerous to any innocent bystanders. It can be dangerous. It can start more fires, so that is an emergency. And an absolute power failure is an emergency. Lose power in the remote control. How does the drone know what to do? Hopefully it does the lost link procedures, but power failure in the drone itself, it falls out of the sky, depending on where it is, that could be catastrophic. So the lost link. Without a pilot on board, small unmanned aircraft system crew members rely on the remote control link to operate the aircraft. A lost link is an interruption or a loss of control link between the control station, i.e. the remote. The remotes are known as remote controls, ground control stations, they have many names, and the aircraft. It is important that you always set your procedures beforehand to ensure that the unmanned aircraft stays in the air in a predictable or planned maneuver, allowing time to reestablish the link. So sometimes they'll just hover there. Now, what I do recommend is and again, there's no set rule on this. People have different theories. When I fly, I don't let it go more than 3 seconds without direct communication between the remote. 5 to 10 seconds, that drone can get pretty far away depending on the kind of mission you're doing. So a lot of that will depend on the mission, but there isn't a set amount of time, but there isn't a common sense amount of time. And so you have to think that through and figure out what's best for where you're flying, your mission, etc. It should auto land. Usually it can either come straight to the ground, it can return to home, but what you're looking for is a termination of the flight and an appropriate landing. And this can also happen not only when you lose a link, but drones are pretty smart. They know to do this when the power is depleted if the user does not understand they need to fly back. A lost link is abnormal, not an emergency. A lost link is not a flyaway, okay? A flyaway is when it flies away. You're not getting it back. Use the manufacturer's recommendations to pre-program your lost link procedures, set a return to home altitude, remember, above any obstructions before the flight, anticipate that it's going to happen to you in advance. Plan for it as if it's going to be part of your mission. That's my advice to you. It happens when you least expect it. It happens frequently. Ensure the altitude will fly above all obstacles. We've talked about that. Have preset communication procedures to notify all the crew in your operation. You need to let them know. In a lost link situation, notify all crew and air traffic control if applicable. If you're out in the Class G area, you don't need to call air traffic control. You need to call maybe if it flies into Class E airspace and it's a flyaway, depending on your proximity to airports. But if you're at the airport and you have a lost link, you're obviously not going to be able to follow ATC recommendations or commands. So at that point, they would need to know that. But the likelihood of you flying in a situation like that is pretty slim, unless you're flying in a controlled kind of thing, like flying with us at the college and we go over to do the airport day. Okay. And then while you're contacting everyone, hopefully you're simultaneously executing those lost link procedures. A flight termination is an intentional and deliberate process of performing a controlled flight to the ground. And you can do this at any place. You don't always have to land where you took off. So that's kind of an important thing to kind of keep in mind. You do not always have to land where you took off, land where it's going to be safest. Now let's talk a little bit about a flyaway. This can often begin with a lost link situation, but it's worse. The aircraft doesn't operate in any predictable or planned manner. It doesn't perform the lost link procedures. If a flyaway occurs in an airspace that requires authorizations, you must notify the local air traffic control or the controlling agency if you were in a military operation area, as outlined in any authorization you have. And if you are flying in an area close, you will know this, the land system. You'll know what to do and who to contact if you're flying that. You don't just wave goodbye in the event of a flyaway. You need to immediately notify all your crew members, bystanders, and air traffic control if applicable, and check your local regulations. You may even have to notify local police and emergency responders, depending on where you are. This is going to be the answer on a question. If they say, what is the most common cause of a flyaway? It is frequency interference, so keep that in mind. Remember that it's only a flyaway when the unmanned aircraft does not respond to control inputs and does not execute its known lost link maneuvers. All right, you cannot tie your dog. Do not do this. I'm not even sure who did this to take a picture. But avoid the over-reliance on automation and be prepared to operate your aircraft manually. Remember, well, if you were at our college, you would remember your first day of training. If you're watching this video from somewhere else, think about it like this. Get yourself some practice. So if you're using DJI, you turn it to what's known as attitude mode or ATTI mode, and fly around. Fly close to the ground in a controlled environment where there isn't a lot of wind, because all those things are going to affect your GPS. But do get familiar with what drones fly like without the global positioning system. This can happen. This can happen depending on where you are, circumstances. They do move satellites from time to time, so you will experience this in your drone adventures. NOTAMs, look for them. Sometimes they're going to tell you about GPS service disruptions. Most drones can operate well without GPS, but you want to practice and be a responsible pilot. You want to practice this before it ever happens to you, not after it happens and you've lost your drone because it's drifted into a tree or something of this nature. Know that if you do lose your GPS, fly your drone normally. Do not panic. If nervous, just land your drone in the first place you can safely. Follow your normal operational procedures. And when flying without GPS, notice and account for with your manual operations any mode or control changes. It probably will drift. If it's very windy, it'll drift a lot. It will not hover the way it does with GPS held in one location. So again, you want to familiarize yourself that this does happen. Another thing that happens is battery fires. These are fires that pose a significant risk to small unmanned aircraft system operations. Before each flight, inspect batteries for damage. Look for bloating or puffiness, deformation of any kind on the battery. And remember the excessive heat. When you pull a battery out, don't plug it right in. The smart batteries from DJI are really good. They won't charge. They're kind of like, I can't charge right now. I'm too hot. Some other ones, some are unique, and some like racing drones, or if you're building your own drone, you try to charge those while they're hot, you're going to cause a problem. So be aware that that occurs as well. Damaged lithium batteries can cause a fire while the drone is in flight, so understand that they can blow while in the sky, and that will pretty much bring your drone down like you see there. They are lithium batteries, they are subjected to heat, temperature changes, etc., puffiness, overuse, poor charging, ineffective charging, all these things. So be aware that you are dealing with that. Remember, you can't carry it. The only battery you can ever carry, because it is dangerous, is the battery within the drone itself. In terms of battery fires or batteries, always follow the manufacturer's recommendations for safe battery handling. Lithium-based batteries are highly flammable and easily capable of ignition. They don't really go out well in water, so we keep a little thing around when we're flying with sand in it at all times, so we can kind of submerge those batteries and protect the environment if need be. And in the case when we don't know if if it just seems wrong, we'll do that as well. Abundance of caution, remember that. These kind of battery fires can happen when a battery short circuits, if it's improperly charged, if it's heated to extreme temperatures. If you crash your drone, always check the battery. If you're just mishandling them, or and this happens, you can get a simply defective one. We've all had this. If you've been around this industry a long time, you pay $200 for a battery, one of these DJI batteries, and then the next thing you know, it flies 2 times and then it just loses power immediately. These things happen. All right, let's talk about a near miss. Here you got a drone and a manned aircraft. Remember, you always get out of the way of the manned aircraft. There's nobody in your drone. You're on the ground safely. There are people in that plane, so keep that in mind. The remote pilot in command must always get out of the path. It is your responsibility to get out of the way. You will be at fault if there is an accident. Keep that in mind. Here's the kind of question you might get on a test. Damaged lithium batteries can cause what? An in-flight fire. What precautions should a remote pilot take? Sure what happened there. So what precautions should a remote pilot take to prevent possible in-flight emergencies when using lithium-based battery fires? And again, you'll see this one. This is a common answer for many questions. When in doubt, if you're taking the test and it says, where do you look? What do you do? Remember, you're responsible. So if the question is who's responsible, it's almost always remote pilot in command. And if it says, where do you look? It's always manufacturer's guidance, manual, something along those lines. Now we're going to talk a little bit, very briefly, about aeronautical decision-making, otherwise known as ADM. An unmanned aircraft system operation may involve a single pilot or crew as follows. The remote pilot who holds a current remote pilot certificate with a UAS rating has final authority and is ultimately responsible. So the licensed pilot. You may have a person manipulating the controls who operates the small unmanned aircraft system under the direct supervision of the PIC. So you can't call it in. You have to be there if they're doing it. So if you're the remote pilot in command, you have to be on site. You have to be able to probably take away physically be able to remove the controls from that person. So you really need to be next to the person manipulating the controls at all times. A visual observer who helps avoid air traffic or other objects in the sky, overhead, or on the ground. And then other people who are associated with the operation as part of the crew. And I talked a little bit about those earlier. It's your job as the remote PIC, especially the licensed remote PIC, to establish a culture of safety and professionalism to ensure situational awareness. That has many definitions, but mainly it is kind of being aware of the drone, the environment, everything going on to mitigate risk, minimize risk, and to be professional and to be aware of what's going on. Situational awareness. Again, it's a term you'll hear often. And it often has many meanings in lots of different industries. So, familiarize yourself with the ideas of situational awareness that'll be on your test. Aeronautical decision-making, ADM, and CRM, crew resource management. ADM, so here's your risk kind of diagram here at your start. The first thing you do, and this is why you go out with your pre-flight and you identify hazards. Are there wires? Are there buildings? Is there frequency interference? That's all your responsibility in aeronautical decision-making, pre-flight checks, that kind of thing. Assess risks. What is the risk? Is the risk worth it? Sometimes some drone operations are so risky, they're probably not worth it. So think about your insurance, your professionalism, your liability. Assess those risks like a professional would do it. Analyze your controls. So do your pre-flight check, do your control checks, make sure your drone's acting appropriately, make sure you have your telemetry going back and forth so you can see on the screen your first person view. Make sure all your walkie-talkies are working. Get everything going. Start your mission. Make your control decisions. You're in charge. Use your controls, use your voice, and monitor your results and minimize risks at all times. So in flight, accept no unnecessary risk. Okay, there's always risk with flying. Okay, you're always going to have it, but it doesn't have to be unnecessary. If you're flying a new airplane, for instance, you might determine that the risk of making that flight in low visibility conditions is unnecessary. Wait for that clear, calm day. So, that weather matters too. That's a hazard you can identify as well. Make risk decisions at the appropriate level. So at each phase in that kind of risk process, you can say, no flight today, all right? And almost go into it with that attitude, with I'm going to look for every reason to cancel this flight today, rather than I'm going to look for every excuse to fly dangerously. And if you can get through all those reasons, then you should have a good, successful mission. Risk decisions should be made by the person who can develop and implement risk controls. That's the remote pilot in command. Remember that you are the PIC, so never let anyone else, not air traffic control, not your client, not your boss, make those decisions for you. You're in charge. Accept risk when the benefits outweigh the dangers or the costs. So it's a cost-benefit analysis. It's a risk management analysis. In any flying activity, it is necessary to accept some degree of risk. A day with good weather, for example, is a much better time to fly an unfamiliar aircraft. But keep in mind, and this is a test question, most accidents happen on clear, calm days because people that caution goes away. They get overconfident. So keep that in mind as well. Integrate all these risk management into your planning at all levels. Because risk is unavoidable in every part of flight, safety requires the use of appropriate and effective risk management and checklists, not just the pre-flight planning stage, but in all stages of the flight. So this is going to be a test question. It's going to say, what does good ADM require, or the aeronautical decision-making? There are three things: situational awareness. All right, so being aware of everything going on around you. Problem recognition, the ability to see a problem before it is a problem, and the good judgment to make a decision whether to continue or to stop. This is known as an SMS, or safety management system. And it is a formal top-down business-like approach to managing risk, which includes a systemic approach to managing safety, organizational structures, the accountability, and policies and procedures. So you probably, as you get into this, and depending on the size of your business, at the college here, we're pretty, we run classes with novice pilots, experienced pilots, pilots learning new skills in the industry, so new software. So we have all kinds of different degrees of experience and ability and knowledge. So we have to have a systemic approach. We have to have operations manuals, which everyone follows. We have to have a SMS, or safety management system, which everyone's familiar with. We have waivers to fly over people, to fly at night. Those also come with their own operational procedure guides. These have clear accountability, who's in charge, who's the decision maker, who lets things go forward. So we have multiple layers. If you're running a one-man operation, you're going to have to take some of this on. So your operations manual might be relatively short, but you should develop this. You should think this through, because again, what you're trying to do is protect your business interests, but mainly what you're trying to do is not have a catastrophic occurrence, accident, or something that's going to hurt someone. I think we can all agree that we'd love to fly drones. It's a lot of fun, but we love to do it without hurting another human being. So be aware that there are some hazardous attitudes. So you can find this if you're using the ASA test prep, remote pilot test prep, you'll find this, and they move the figure around, but generally speaking, it's in the operations chapter and usually around the 5th figure. You can find these on the internet as well, or you can just look at it here and I'll tell you what it is. So there are basically 5 hazardous attitudes that aviators have come up with, and there are 5 antidotes. So the one thing is, you get the person with the personality of anti-authority. Don't tell me what to do. I'm in charge. They have that authority complex. What you need to do is get away from that. If you have this issue, stop. Just follow the rules. The rules may not always right, but they're going to be almost always right, which means they're your best defense against an accident or an error in judgment. So follow the rules. They're usually right. That's the antidote. And there are test questions on these, so you will want to pay attention. Impulsivity, do something quickly. We see this a lot. All right, I only got an hour of sunlight left. I need to get this mission done. There's money on the line. Let me just rush it through. This is where you're going to have a problem. So not so fast. Think first. Is it worth it? What are my risks? What do I have to lose? What would happen if I hurt another person? All these things. Think about it. Invulnerability. I've heard that happen to people. It won't happen to me. That can't happen to me. Oh, it'll happen to you. You'll lose GPS. You're going to have a loss. Like, you do this long enough. An airplane. I've had airplanes fly towards my drone to check them out. Okay. Keep in mind, this will happen. You need to be paying attention all the time. It amazed me that someone would literally turn their plane towards the drone to see what it was. But it can happen. Guess who's at fault? It's not that person's fault for being curious. It's your fault. And it's your responsibility as the remote pilot in command. So keep that in mind. You do not want to hurt another person. Macho. I can do it. Machismo, they might call this. Remember, the antidote is taking chances is foolish. There's no reason to show off. You're going to get people that are going to come out and look at you. This is not a time to be fancy. This is a time to be serious and professional. Trust me, if there's somebody there who wants to hire you and pay you money, they want a professional person, not someone who's going to be careless, because their insurance, their dollars may be on the line. So you're going to pick up more clients if you are professional and you look like you are taking no chances. Resignation. Well, it flew away. What can I do? All right, remember, you're not helpless. You can make a difference. You can do your lost link procedures. You can move towards the drone. There's always things you can do. All right, keep in mind these hazardous attitudes. They can affect unmanned operations. So you can fall behind in the progress of the aircraft so that you lose situational awareness, is what that's known. So in other words, the aircraft's moving, you're not in there, so you can literally, it can move faster than you can keep up with either mentally or visually. So keep that in mind. Operating without adequate battery reserve, pushing it, all right? All right, I can get this done. I only have a half a battery. It's going to take 3 normally, but I'm a really good pilot. Don't do that kind of stuff. loss of positional or situational awareness. This happens a lot. You're on the ground. It's in the sky. It's 300 feet in the sky. It's a Mavic Mini. You're going to have a hard time telling which way it's pointing, especially if you lose that telemetry and that visual part of it. So be aware of that. So be careful. Failure to complete all tasks, inspections, and checklists. I see this a lot, people rushing it through. Well, I checked it 4 times today. Just take the time and do it for the sake of everyone involved, all your crew members, yourself, your business, and all the innocent people either in the sky or on the ground. Take your time to do these. And people just, the general catch-all, unsafe operations. I didn't realize that was going to happen. You need one to look up. There are 2 you can look up right now. One is the Las Vegas FLYAWAY, which landed on the McCarran Airport by the recreational user while the president was there. So that, I believe that was a $20,000 fine. And then there's a new one you can watch unfold where someone tried to take their drone up when the Blue Angels were flying over during the COVID-19 pandemic as kind of a morale booster. Nothing like a morale booster. Someone throws their drone up. That's bad for our industry. That's just general reckless behavior. The Blue Angels fly way too fast. You're not getting out of their way, and there's TFRs. You are not allowed to fly then anyway. So keep that in mind. Do the right thing. All right. So as you can see, we keep a lot of rules here at the Ed and Eileen Smith drone port. Here we fly at Warren County Community College. We have a nice sign made that we have to constantly update. Keep these things in mind. Let other people be aware. Let them be safe. Be aware also of your own physiological condition and terminate operations if you experience any condition that would interfere with the safe operation of your drone. You must be self-aware at all times. So you may be out there in 100-degree weather. You may be out there in 30-degree weather. These are going to affect you and your physiology, and it's your responsibility. So while many factors are beyond the control of the pilot, awareness of the cause and effect can help minimize adverse effects. So know that you might have physical stress, psychological stress, physiological stress, psychological stress. Be aware of all the things that can affect you. Look up these things. Once you've done your Part 107, you've just begun your learning. So keep these in mind. One of the things that can happen is you might hyperventilate. This is a condition by which you start to breathe very fast. Heavy breathing occurs with a healthy balance between breathing in oxygen and breathing out carbon dioxide. But if you upset this balance when you hyperventilate by exhaling more than you inhale, this causes a rapid reduction in carbon dioxide in the body, which you need. So you've seen this. You've seen this in old sitcoms where somebody breathed into a bag. You get it on a plane. They send you down more oxygen. If something's going wrong, that's to calm you down. Low carbon dioxide levels lead to narrowing of the blood vessels that supply blood to the brain. Okay, you're getting the idea. You're not going to be thinking straight. This reduction in blood supply to the brain leads to symptoms like lightheadedness, tingling in the fingers. So keep this in mind, and you can lose consciousness. You start to get tingling in your fingers. You start to get a little lightheaded. You're on the ground. Drone's in the sky. Get the drone to the ground. Hot day, heat stroke. This is a condition caused by your body overheating, usually as a result of prolonged exposure to or physical exertion in high temperatures. This in the most serious form, it's called heat stroke, and it can occur if your body temperature rises to 104 degrees Fahrenheit or higher. The condition is most common in the summer months. Be aware of this. You probably can't do 10 straight hours in the sun. You're going to lose. You're going to make mistakes, and that's going to lead to a problem. So be aware of that. Heat stroke, look for these signs and symptoms: high body temperature, altered mental state or behavior. You're starting to act funny. You're starting to think things are funny that you normally wouldn't. This could be something. Alterations in sweating. If you're nauseous and vomiting, you should have your drone on the ground, but look for flushed skin, rapid breathing, heart rate, headache, these kinds of things. I would say whenever you get a headache, it's not a great day for flying a drone. You might be out on a really cold day. Hypothermia, when your body loses heat faster than it can produce heat, causes dangerously low body temperatures. All right. Occurs when your body falls below 95 degrees Fahrenheit or 35 degrees Celsius. When your body temperature drops, your heart, your nervous system, other organs, they just don't work normally. Left untreated, hypothermia can eventually lead to complete failure of your heart and respiratory system and eventually death. So trying to get that last job in, remember, you got your car. You probably got to go warm up your batteries anyway. Get back in your automobile, turn it on, warm up from time to time. Warm your equipment back up if you're doing a lot of cold weather flying. Stress, medical or biological context. Stress is a physical, mental, or emotional factor that causes bodily or mental tension. Stresses can be external. They can come from the environment or social situations, your job, your family, or it can come from an internal, an illness or a medical procedure. Stress can initiate the fight or flight response, a complex reaction of neurological and endocrinological symptoms. So keep these in mind. Understand that you have stress. One test question, I'm not sure they give this one anymore, but I always thought it was funny. How do you diminish stress? The answer was remove stressful things from your life. Now, we can't always do that. I found that very funny. And my spouse did not find it as funny when I expressed that I had to, remove stress from my life. She didn't find it as humorous as I found it. You can't always remove all your stress. Some of the things we love most cause us the most stress. So keep that in mind. But understand, if you're completely stressed out, you know the mood. You're snapping at everybody. Don't fly. That's not a day to fly. Be aware of fatigue. Be aware it exists. Probably if it's come upon you, it's too late. Be aware of that. Fatigue can be described as a lack of energy and motivation, both physical and mental. It's different than drowsiness. Drowsiness kind of says you need sleep. This is more than that. You feel tired. You may need a healthcare profession to let you know whether it's fatigue. Other symptoms besides drowsiness can be shortness of breath, inactivity, and muscular weakness. These can occur at the same time. Fatigue can be a normal response to physical and mental activity. In most normal individuals, it's quickly relieved, usually an hour to about a day, depending on the intensity of the activity, or just reducing it. So get away from stressful situations if you can. Understand, though, there is chronic stress, and that is different than this. This can be physiological, psychological, and this is when you get to a certain point, your body starts giving you signs that you're reaching the limit of what you can take. Once you've crossed that, you begin to compromise your mental and physical health. Here are some common symptoms: inability to concentrate at all, not a good time to fly a drone. You're going to make poor judgment. You're going to have extreme moodiness. Be aware of these kinds of issues. You may need to seek medical help, but definitely not a good time to fly. You may have irritability or short temper. You may feel overwhelmed, constantly worrying, chest pain, rapid heartbeat, frequent sickness, an inability to relax, procrastination or neglecting responsibilities, using alcohol, cigarettes, or drugs to relax, or depression. So you can see that this can become very serious. So if you start to show minimal symptoms, you want to talk to somebody. All right, so remember, maintenance and inspection procedures, you're responsible as the remote pilot in command. So you need to document all your repairs, keep a binder, keep a book, keep something on the internet, keep something in the cloud, whatever way you like to do it. But keep a list of everything you've ever done. If you replace batteries, how many times you used the batteries, you're going to be responsible for everything. So you might as well start getting used to record keeping. Record all the flights that you take. You're going to need these if you want higher level certifications anyway, like AUVSI top, but you need to know how long your drone's been in the air. Make sure you access your records over time and create a maintenance schedule. Look up how long batteries for your particular drone last and how many flight hours, and that way you'll know when to replace them. There are people on the internet who have come to some pretty good understanding of these, and you should read and look them up. When establishing a maintenance schedule, be sure to start first with your manufacturer's guidance and manuals. All the test questions are going to come back to the manufacturer's guidance and manuals, almost always the answer in these kinds of questions. Only set up your own schedule of maintenance if the manufacturer has not already established one for that aircraft. So you want to look online, you want to look up your aircraft, figure out if one's there. There's a lot of great drone community people out there, so if the manufacturer hasn't done it, there's been enough arguments already. We're deep enough into this that you can probably find a really good one that's been well worked out on the internet that you can then just kind of modify for your own use. Establish your own and always be conservative maintenance schedule. So in other words, if it's if it's telling me that I should only fly a particular battery for 100 flight hours, I probably would stop at 80. Okay, I'm going to go to the conservative. I'm going to say, well, I'm an unlucky guy. I'm going to buy all the batteries that are going to break faster. So keep that in mind. So here's a kind of test question you might see. What source of information you consult when first determining what maintenance should be performed on a drone or its components? And the answer is always, what source? Manufacturer. Always manufacturer's guidance on such things. Under what conditions should the operator of a small unmanned aircraft establish a scheduled maintenance protocol? And you'll remember, when the manufacturer does not provide the maintenance schedule themselves. When should the battery for an unmanned aircraft be replaced? Here's another test question. I just had this one. All right. Per the guidance of the UAS manufacturer or the battery manufacturer, whichever is more restrictive. Okay. Or if there's a bulge in the battery, keep that one in mind. This is the final video that we have for operations. I wish you well. By now, if you've watched all the videos, and you've used the ASA test prep, remote pilot test prep guide, you should be very successful in passing your Part 107 test. Do not go in there going, I want to get 100. Okay, there's always a question that's usually a new question, which you've never seen before. And you're like, I've done droning for 5 years, and I don't understand this. Where did this question come from? Everybody gets them. So your goal should be to get a good score, well above 70, understand the questions you got wrong, and work towards a successful career in the unmanned systems industry. I wish you well. Thank you very much. This has been Dr. Will Austin for Warren County Community College.